Okay, I'm going to get started. Then feel free to keep your video on or interact, yeah, as you want to. Okay, so a quick recall on what we discussed last few sessions is that we spoke about 4 good food standards. We discussed the first one where we spoke about how the psychological effect on food affects us. What is the difference between satiety and satiation, and how certain foods which are dense in calories, but actually really shallow in nutrition, they hinder the satiety signals from reaching us. Satiation is felt in the gut much later, a few hours later, and therefore these are generally considered foods with no breaks, and they mess with our psychological relationship with food. Okay, so that was the first understanding of the psychology of how food affects us. We spoke about emotions and habits, the reward systems, the highs and lows that the different dopamine and all of those make us feel. So we discussed that. Now, today we're going to talk about the second good food standard, which is to do with the hormonal response. Okay, this is a really interesting chapter, and I think that the author has done a fantastic job of explaining it in a really systematic, not too sciencey, and then putting it all together, really nice, simple way. So they say that, okay, they're simplifying things quite a bit, because really when it comes to science, and I believe this as well, is that it is not important to understand everything about how the body works, etc., as long as we get an understanding of how we can apply what we are reading, and how can we apply our understanding, and that's really important. So let's get into it. So let's talk about hormones. Chemical messengers, we all know this, we've studied it in school. They are the messengers that are usually transported in our bloodstream. They are secreted by cells in one part of the body, and then they carry the message and they bind with receptors in another part of the body, thereby transferring the message. So what their main role is to keep things in balance. Okay, so all the processes in the body have regulatory mechanisms. They are designed to keep our systems operating within safe, healthy parameters. We've heard of homeostasis, which is a state of equilibrium that the body needs to maintain if it needs to function properly. The book gives the example of the thermostat. I think we can look at the air conditioning with exactly the same understanding, that we turn on our air conditioner, the temperature, we set it to a certain temperature. When the temperature in the room comes down to it, the thermostat operates, and then it stabilizes the temperature at that level. So when, let's say that we've got the AC on and suddenly we light the gas, and the room starts heating up, obviously the AC is going to change its parameters, its inner workings, in order to get back to the temperature that we have set it to get to. So our body's equilibrium is kind of the same way. It does an internal correction and it maintains a normal range of temperature, and then it relaxes. So hormones play a really important role to make sure that homeostasis happens in the body. Okay, and in order to do that, multiple hormonal responses are triggered. Okay, now different nutrients cause different hormonal responses, but all of those responses are intended to correct the shift in balance, which is caused by the influx of digested food particles. So again, I'll explain this, saying that we take in food particles. All food is considered chemicals in the body, which generate a certain hormonal response, so that the effect of the digestion, the ingestion of those chemicals is understood correctly and acted upon by the body. Okay, now there are a lot of hormones, but the 4 main ones and really, really important ones that the book talks about is insulin, leptin, glucagon, and cortisol. Okay, and then we're going to go through each one to understand their role individually and then their interplay in the feedback loops that influence all our body systems. So these 4 are like a team, okay? The effect of one affects the other. The behavior of one affects the behavior of the other. The production of one affects the production of the other. Okay. So when you've either got too much or too little of a particular given hormone, it has an influence on the other. So we're going to start with insulin and leptin. Insulin, anabolic, building, storing hormone, it's secreted by the beta cells of the pancreas. How? In response to us ingesting energy, usually from carbohydrate. Okay. So it basically moves the macronutrients into our cells. The macronutrients that we are ingesting in our food gets moved into the cells by insulin. Now, when insulin levels are chronically elevated, along with leptin resistance, that leads to high cortisol levels. So this will make a lot more sense as we proceed further. Okay. Insulin is as close to being a master hormone as you can get. We've all heard a little bit about it. We have, a vague understanding of it, but this will clear it out. So insulin is like, we often call it a doorkeeper hormone. So it unlocks a one-way door into the cells so that they can store or use the nutrients that we are ingesting. So it basically helps in storage of all macronutrients, proteins, fats, as well as carbohydrate. But the pace or the rate at which insulin is secreted is mostly tied up with the carbohydrates that are ingested. So when we eat carbohydrate, we know that it's broken down to the body into simple sugars, and then it enters the bloodstream in the form of glucose. Okay, so it's circulating in our bloodstream. If the glucose levels in the bloodstream are higher than a normal range, then that is a red sign for the body. And so insulin gets secreted in order to move the glucose for storage into the cells in another form called glycogen. A rise in blood sugar is sensed by the beta cells in the pancreas. They secrete insulin into the bloodstream. The cell opens for the glucose to get out of the bloodstream, move into storage, and therefore the the blood sugar levels come back to a normal, healthy range. Okay. When the insulin levels are high, we also feel reduced hunger. Why? Because we have enough glucose in the bloodstream, and therefore the hunger hormone is reduced. Okay. Now, this is what we call insulin sensitivity. The opposite of that is insulin resistance, which you may have heard about, but we'll get to that. So if our metabolism is healthy, this is how we experience the highs and lows of insulin. Your blood sugar levels rise moderately, not too much, not too fast. Insulin's message is store these nutrients. So the cells which are sensitive to receiving the insulin message, they say, okay, great, I've got space, I'm going to store these nutrients, and it pulls the blood sugar out, storing it. Blood glucose levels come back to a normal level. Okay. Now, we all understand, I think, that chronically high levels of blood sugar, which is called hyperglycemia, is harmful, and therefore managing a healthy blood sugar level is definitely critical for long-term health. Okay. Now, the cells that mainly store the glucose, is the liver and our muscles. So these are where the glucose coming out of the bloodstream gets stored in the form of glycogen. Now, if it is stored in the liver, then it can be easily converted back into glucose and back to the bloodstream whenever we need it. So when the body needs energy, it gets converted first from the liver. Okay. In the muscle cells, it can, the glucose which is stored in the muscle cells can only be expended as physical output. So the body cannot convert the glucose back from the muscle cells into the bloodstream. Okay. So it is important to exercise in order to be able to use that energy. So it's kind of like the liver and the muscles are like our gas tankies. Okay, they have a limit. You can't expand the tanky. The more muscle you have, therefore, the bigger our gas tanks, because we have more capacity to store glycogen in the body. And that's one of the reasons why, when you see people who exercise regularly or have good muscle mass, they normally tend to have good levels of energy. It's because their capacity, their gas tanks for storage of glycogen are bigger than ones with lesser muscle mass, okay? This is a little bit of interesting fact that we can only store enough glycogen in our muscles to sustain continuous hard activity for about 90 minutes. After 90 minutes, the body starts converting energy from other sources, which is not from the muscle fuel, okay? So it's really easy to fill up your tank with carbs, but if you're not doing a lot of high intensity activity, you're not really using much fuel. This is really important because in our sedentary lives, we do have the capacity for storage, but not as much for output or expending that stored reserves. Now, when we are living a sedentary life or sort of, and we are over carb consumption, so over consuming the type of caloric dense but nutrient poor carbs that we spoke about, the chronic overconsumption of these kind of foods is where it's actually the exact area where the hormonal problems start. A constant excess supply of carbs will tilt your metabolic preference towards burning what is most plentiful, which is sugar when fuel is needed. If there is an overabundance of sugar, the sugar will take precedence over fat as a source of energy in many metabolic processes. So this is like saying that the body is addicted to sugar as a source of fuel first. So as long as there is an incoming amount of sugar into the system, the body will keep using that first for its energy needs, rather than go to the stored fat reserves and they just don't get burned for energy. So all this, so again, over-consuming carbs, especially of the unfavorable types, leads to a storage problem in the body, okay? If there's space available in the liver and muscle cells, they'll take up the glucose. But if those cells are already full, then they will say, no, thank you. And when there is no room to store this glucose as glycogen, then the body shifts to what they call plan B, okay? So then what will the liver do? It will convert the extra glucose, which is the extra glucose that is coming in, which cannot be stored, okay, as glycogen. It will convert it into a type of saturated fat called palmitic acid. It can bind together with a group of 3. So for simplicity, it will basically convert this extra energy into triglycerides. So when the two processes are combined, which is that the body has gotten used to burning carbs over fat for fuel, and the excess which is being consumed is nicely being created into triglycerides. The combination of these two leads to higher body fat and increased triglycerides. So neither of this is what we want, okay? Now, let's see what happens when leptin enters this energy balance. Now, leptin is a hormone which is secreted by the fat cells of the body. Leptin's role is to tell the brain how much body fat is stored, and it regulates our energy intake and our energy expenditure to keep our body fat levels in balance. Leptin is sometimes referred to as satiety hormone because when you have high leptin levels, then you actually feel quite full, quite satisfied. And it normally, leptin secretion is tied up to our eating schedule. So obviously we don't eat while we're sleeping, so leptin levels are low. They are low first things in the morning. And then as we get, after our meal, the leptin levels increase. When you're done eating for the day, the levels are higher. So they keep you full and satisfied until bedtime. Okay. So again, it's to understand that fat and body fat is not a bad thing, because we actually, from our ancient history, from the ancient memory in our DNA, we have an understanding that we need to have surplus ready energy available at any time, because if there is a famine, if there is a dearth of energy, then the body needs to be able to have its stored reserves of fuel. And that is why it's not something that we can say that, oh, in today's lifestyle, why doesn't the body understand that I don't need extra? It's evolutionary memory and history over thousands of years. And we have been living the way that we currently do very, very recently, just a speck in the time zone of how our DNA stores memory. Okay. So as it says, we worked hard for the food we ate. There were no guarantees that our food supply could be taken for granted. And therefore, the ancient signals in the modern world just haven't caught up. As far, fat is a storage depot for energy. So it is important for your body to have a way to measure how much energy is available at any given moment. So how do fat cells understand that? They secrete leptin. How? So when they secrete leptin, the message goes to the brain saying that, okay, there's too much fat or there's too little fat. So you're either too fat or too lean or just right. Okay. And then your brain, based on the signal that it's getting from the fat cells by leptin secretion, it gives you the subconscious directions, which then drive your food seeking behavior. So if you have very little body fat, then leptin levels are low. So it will give you the message saying, I don't have enough body fat, eat more, move less, conserve energy. Okay. If your leptin levels are high, then the message that the brain will give you is that, you know what, I don't need more energy and, you need to consume lesser. So that is how the brain then helps us understand how full we are, how satiated we are. As the body fat continues to accumulate, leptin levels rise, fat cells start to send more messages to your brain. Okay, so we've got enough. And thereby, so you understand when to increase the activity levels and when to reduce it and reduce your, in most of our cases, it's usually, a sign to say that we normally have a lot more energy than we do expend in the day through physical movement, etc. So it's rare, rare unless you are a marathoner or you are into a very, and I'm not even talking about athletes over here, we're just talking about regular people. It's rare for us to feel the need to conserve our output because leptin levels are very low. Okay, so when you chronically overconsume food with no breaks, floods your system with glucose, with sugar in a large supply, it is first burned for energy. Then the buildup, the excess is converted into triglycerides in the liver, increased glucose and triglyceride levels in the bloodstream. And this combination leads to leptin resistance. Why? Because the combination of the increased insulin, increased glucose levels, and the triglycerides doesn't allow the brain message to get through to us. It doesn't allow us to hear the brain to say that I have enough fat. So we end up over-consuming fat. I'm sure you know of people who are skinny. This is much more common in Indian men, where you are overall thin, but you have a belly. Okay, so the Indian pot belly in men is everywhere, you see. This is visceral fat, which is fat stored in and around your organs. And the very fact that you have visceral fat, so you have a pot belly, is a clear sign that there is a hormonal dysfunction and that there is leptin resistance, which is, again, the message from leptin to the brain is not reaching us in understanding whether the amount of fat that we have in our body is enough for us or not. Okay, so these people are what we call skinny fat. They don't look visibly overweight, but unhealthy amount of belly fat. And this is actually most harmful for men because all our organs are around our belly. And when there is visceral fat, extra storage, it's more stress on all our organs. So leptin resistance is like a hormonal conversation gone haywire. Normally, when you've accumulated adequate body fat, your fat cells send a message to your brain, hey, we've got enough energy stored. This is just a recap. But when receptors in the brain and other tissues become less sensitive to leptin, these messages don't get through. So your brain doesn't hear leptin say that you've got enough body fat, which then makes you think that you're actually skinny. And that leads to a certain hunger response, okay, which is not rational, logical, etc. So leptin's message is, so one of the signs that you know that you have some level of leptin resistance is when after dinner, you have cravings, uncontrollable cravings. You know, you've eaten a nice meal, you have been really good with your meals all day long, but the minute you rest and relax and you unwind, you feel these uncontrollable cravings, usually of a little bit after dinner. So this is not just you not having willpower or not being able to control your urges and all of that. It's actually your brain responding to leptin's primal signals, because it's actually confused. It thinks that you are skinny without understanding that you actually have more than enough body fat than what your requirements are. So you're gaining fat, you are swimming in leptin, but your brain is clueless. So it turns your metabolism down, it conserves fuel, and it tells you to eat more. Okay, so a really, really confused situation. Okay, so let's now link what we discussed as insulin. Remember, we said insulin sensitivity, when the insulin gets released, that responds to the glucose in the bloodstream, opens the doors of the cells, gets stored into glycogen, and the blood sugar levels go down to a normal level. That's insulin sensitivity. The opposite of that is insulin resistance. So leptin resistance and insulin leads to insulin resistance. Let's look at why and how. So what happens when there is a lot of insulin being produced, right? The cells are being asked to store a lot of glucose. Now, the trouble is that you can't jam a lot of energy into cells, because that itself causes damage to the cells. So the cells cannot be overfilled. The cells become, and when you are trying to stuff the cells with energy, they become insulin resistance. When they become insulin resistance, the cells lose that sensitivity to insulin's message to store nutrients. So they just ignore insulin's message, saying that, no, we're full, we don't want to listen to you, right? And we will not take in any more nutrients. So what happens to the blood sugar levels? They stay high. Now, body can't have high blood sugar levels, okay, because it is really, really harmful for the body to do that. So it needs the cells to go somewhere. So what it does is the pancreas will release even more insulin. It will try to give the cells a stronger message saying, come on, you've got to open up. This is very, very important. And the message is strong enough to force the nutrients into already full cells. But what happens with this force feeding is that there is a lot of free radicals, oxidative stress, and the fat levels in the body, the cortisol levels. So they're all high. And this leads to damage of the cell tissues. So, and that then eventually leads to what we call inflammation. So reactive oxygen species, this is free radicals as we understand it. They cause cellular damage. When there is cellular damage, you can understand that the immune system has to go and respond. So it brings up an immune response in the body. Inflammatory chemicals are released, cortisol is high, the first responders. So this immune response is a systemic inflammation. There's actually no issue as such, because the food that we're eating it's food, but the body sees it as something that needs an immune system response because there is damage happening. So elevated levels of blood sugar, which is hyperglycemia, leads to this kind of damage through free radicals being released and systemic inflammation happening. Now, chronic hyperglycemia first causes beta cell adaptation to allow the pancreas to produce more and more insulin to manage the excess blood sugar. Eventually, damaged by it, the beta cells start to disintegrate. So the beta cells itself, the ones that produce the insulin, they begin to start getting damaged. And they actually die from the high levels of toxicity because the blood sugar is very high. So this is the point where the body loses the ability to produce enough insulin. And this is what we call type 2 diabetes. So hyperglycemia is damaging, but when it comes to chronically high levels of insulin, that is really, really harmful. It's profoundly damaging. A clear risk factor for major lifestyle related diseases. Okay. Even if you don't actually get to a type 2 diabetes state, you are just a little bit under. When we say that, oh, somebody is pre-diabetic, understand that they already have hyperglycemia, which means that the blood sugar levels are already higher than desirable constantly, which is causing damage to the cells because the cells are not able to take in anymore. And it is causing damage to the insulin producing beta cells of the pancreas. So all of this is happening anyways, even though you're not diabetic. Okay. All right. Since your blood sugar regulation mechanism no longer works properly, all that insulin can pull blood sugar levels too far in the other direction. What happens? What was too high is now too low. So, you know that yo-yo that we've heard of people who constantly need to have something sweet. It could be just something little, or they constantly need some carbs all the time because the blood sugar levels spike up and then they spike down. So there is a very fast spike in blood glucose and then a very high, very quick low. Okay. When there is a very quick dip in blood sugar levels, that is also just as dangerous for the body. So the brain has to go into panic mode and say that, no, this can't work. I'm feeling cranky. I'm feeling tired. My brain is foggy. I need sugar. And over the years and talking to so many people, I must say, especially women who are often vegetarian, this is a very constant feeling. They will relate to this, where they feel that, okay, I just need a little bit of sugar and then I'll be fine. So that is the must eat sugar message. Yeah. Okay, we've spoken about this. Okay, so I hope the understanding of insulin, why the body has to produce more insulin to store excess blood sugar, which is floating in the blood, why that puts stress on the cells which are trying to store it. This stress puts more stress on the pancreas, which is trying to produce more insulin. Eventually, the mechanism of the beta cells breaks down and the body is not able to produce it. If you don't know anybody who has got type 2 diabetes, that does not mean that, okay, this situation is, fail safe. That person is simply just a couple of steps below where the beta cells of the pancreas have totally broken down. So they are already in a state of hyperglycemia, which means blood glucose levels stay high, and hyperinsulinemia, which is that too much insulin is being tried to be produced by the pancreas. So I hope this is clear. And this leads to leptin resistance because the brain actually doesn't understand the presence of high insulin. Leptin's message is not going to the brain to say that you have enough fat, you don't need more energy. Okay. The third hormone here, we're talking about glucagon. Okay. Glucagon is a breakdown hormone. It is secreted from the alpha cells. So also from the pancreas, but the alpha cells of the pancreas. It is secreted in exactly the opposite response of insulin. So when the body needs energy, glucagon is produced in response to the signal saying, hey, I need energy. Can you please unrelease the stored energy in the cells and please feed it back into the bloodstream? Okay. So in response to a demand for energy, either as a result of activity, so for example, physical activity, or as a result of fasting. So intermittent fasting is so popular because it is actually nudging the response, the glucagon response, to release energy, ideally out of the fat cells, and allowing you to access that energy that you have previously stored. And that is why something like intermittent fasting is taking on, a lot of popularity among people, because that is the response that their body is experiencing as a result of the fasting. So chronic stress, protein intake, and low blood sugar levels. So fasting leads to low blood sugar levels, which stimulates the glucagon response. But when insulin levels are high and when there are a lot of triglycerides, floating, that's when the glucagon doesn't work the way that it is supposed to. Okay. I think I just recapped this, which is the glucose, glycogen, and glucagon. So I'm going to move on. It's interesting that there is only about 5 grams, a teaspoon of blood sugar in our bloodstream at any given time. Okay. So when we haven't eaten in a long time, or when we've had the blood sugar low, our temperatures can get too low. That's just a little bit of hypoglycemia. Since glucose supply to the brain is literally a matter of life or death, you'll go into a coma if blood glucose levels dip extremely low. Okay. Therefore, your body has multiple ways, multiple mechanisms to ensure that this does not happen. And one of those mechanisms is via glucagon, because glucagon is the one that gets into action, gives a message to the body saying blood sugar levels are really falling and we need to start using up the energy that we have stored previously. Okay, so that's when the alpha cells in the pancreas release glucagon. Glucagon then tells the body to break down the stored fat, convert the liver glycogen into glucose, and trickle it back into the bloodstream, so that we have enough energy to keep our blood sugar levels normal. Now, we just mentioned this, that it can only do this job when there's not a lot of circulating insulin. So when insulin levels are elevated, even moderately, the net effect is more energy storage than energy access. I think we've understood this by now. Yeah. So glucagon is a very important hormone, which actually helps us to not only stabilize blood sugar, but more importantly, to access our own stored fat for energy. But it doesn't work properly if insulin levels are chronically elevated, which is the situation we spoke about earlier, where if insulin levels are elevated, what happens? Okay. So this hormone, which should be working well for most of us, which should be getting released because our protein intake is good, because we are stimulated. So usually a positive stress also produces a positive glucagon response. So these situations have to be created for glucagon to help us, both for stabilizing blood sugar as well as for accessing stored energy. The cortisol. We've all heard of cortisol as a stress hormone. It is secreted from the adrenal glands. Why? Because it helps our body recover from a fight or flight stress response. So we've heard this. It is a stress hormone in response to either physical or psychosocial, which is more often these days. Less often is the intense or prolonged exercise, but we know from examples of people that we hear about, highly stressed individuals who use exercise or workout as a method of release. They also often have a constantly elevated cortisol levels, especially if they are sleep deprived as well because of stress or workload, etc. Okay. Plays a key role in salt metabolism. This is important in maintaining our blood pressure, our immune function, and our energy regulation. All these are obviously related. Yeah. It raises the blood sugar by stimulating glycogen breakdown. Raises blood sugar by stimulating glycogen breakdown. Okay. So that is releasing energy back into the bloodstream. When your cortisol levels are elevated constantly, then it leads to insulin resistance as well as high levels of leptin. So cortisol is one hormone which has a circadian rhythm. So it's related to the light and the dark cycle. Often, if your sleeping habits are, if you are well regulated in terms of your day or your week, then you'll find that cortisol levels are highest just before waking up. So they actually help us get up. Sunlight helps in calibrating our cortisol's daily rhythm, and darkness does the opposite. So it makes our cortisol levels low. Tired but wired effect. Okay, so this is when we are using a lot of digital technology. We're using artificial lights. It doesn't help cortisol give us that message saying that it's dark. We need to unwind. So we are feeling tired, but we're also feeling wired up. Okay, because the circadian rhythms of the body are not in sync with sunlight or with our light-dark cycles. These affect our cells, the quality of our cells, which affect our memory and future memory access. So slightly unrelated, but when cortisol levels stay high for a really long period of time, as in decades, when you had a super stressed this thing, then what happens is it leads to things like Alzheimer's, memory loss, all of that kind of thing. Hold on a second. I'm going to take us. Okay. One of cortisol's jobs is to help glucagon keep blood sugar within a healthy range. So when your body senses that blood sugar is low, or if it crashes very fast, then it reacts to that stressful situation by releasing cortisol. Okay. Then it prompts glucagon to get to work. Why? Because the breakdown of the energy. Okay, so this is a little complicated. I'm going to go through this a little faster. When your actions, dietary or otherwise, tell your body that you're very stressed all the time. So this is also the message that the brain is telling us, oh, I'm stressed, whether you're a student or whether you are a person working corporate life or whatever. Then what happens is you have cortisol released all the time. Again, if you have slept lesser, if you have exercised too much, or if you are on digital technology a lot, then all of this can trigger unhealthy levels of cortisol in the body. Okay. And even fasting is somewhat stressful to the body, and it can elevate all our stress levels, which adds more cortisol to an already stressed system. Now, why are the cortisol levels highly elevated? Because they want us to preserve our body fat. They do not want us to go to a level below a healthy fat level. Okay. This leaves you with more fat and less muscle. More fat and less muscle. So it stops the uptake of the glucose from the bloodstream, increases breakdown of glycogen. Stress, which causes chronically elevated cortisol levels, increases blood sugar levels and contributes to insulin resistance. So in a nutshell, when cortisol levels are high, insulin levels are high, it leads to insulin resistance, which is what we understand that we are neither able to store energy properly, nor are we able to use what we have. And this high cortisol levels direct the body fat to the abs. Central obesity, metabolic syndrome, which is then leads to all the other problems, obesity, high blood pressure, weight gain, all of that. Okay. Okay. So it's all about, now this is the part that I really like actually in the book, because so far it's like all super sciencey. But unless we actually put it into kind of a case study, then only we can actually understand what is the effect of these hormones on our body. Okay, so this is quite interesting. They give us a case study of healthy hormones. So when your hormones are operating well, what does a good day look like? Okay, so you are a person who is relatively lean, healthy diet, lifestyle, good sleeping habits. You don't overconsume any of those high carb, nutrient food, poor foods. Your hormones are in good, healthy balance. What happens then? Let's say you wake up by about 6 a.m. Okay, because cortisol levels are high. They tell you, hey, it's morning, time to start your day. You feel like you are a morning person. And at this time, your leptin levels are low, telling you that you're hungry. So what do? You sit down and you eat a decent meal. By, say, you wake up at 7, you eat a meal by 6, you wake up at 6, you have a meal by 7. Your meal has 3 eggs scrambled with some vegetables, onion, pepper, spinach, maybe some avocado, some good fat cooked in ghee or oil, or coconut oil, a little bit of fresh fruit, a cup of coffee, all of that. There's not a lot of carbs in this meal. Do you understand? There's a little bit of fruit, a little bit of vegetables, quite a bit of protein, and good fats. Not a lot of carbs in this meal. So what happens to the blood sugar? It rises steadily, not too fast. Yeah. When it rises steadily, your pancreas will release a responsible amount of insulin in response to the blood sugar rising up. So what will happen is the cells will open, the blood sugar will go into the stores, settle down as glycogen, and the blood sugar will come slowly back to normal over the next few hours. So over the next few hours, your blood sugar will come down gradually. Then when your blood sugar comes down, glucagon will get the message saying, hey, blood sugar's come down. Can you please release some energy? Okay, we need some fuel. And it's not coming from food. So where will it come from? It will come from your stored fats. So glucagon then releases a little bit back in the bloodstream and maintains a decent level of blood sugar. This helps you keep your brain focused. You are mentally alert throughout the day. Then what happens is your blood sugar goes down again, maybe about noon. You feel hunger hormones rising. You feel like eating lunch. Then you have a good big salad. You have greens, vegetables. You have some fruit with it. You have chicken breast, walnuts, olive oil, balsamic vinegar, whatever. Okay, so like a nice combination of protein and greens, etc. You relax, you enjoy your meal, and then you get exactly the similar response as you had after breakfast. Not too many carbs, steady bloodstream, both insulin and glucagon working together. By evening, let's say afternoon, evening, work has become really stressful, or if you're a student, assignments are due or whatever, and you've not had time to eat again another meal. So your blood sugar dips low, cortisol levels go up. Okay. Then again, glucagon releases some more energy into the bloodstream. You come home, it's dinner time, about 6:30, 7. You're hungry, properly hungry, but you're not cranky. You're not lightheaded or foggy or lethargic. And then you have a nice similar lunch as dinner. So you'll have a cooked dinner with some meat or a gravy, some good vegetables, etc. And this releases the secretion of satiety hormones, leptin, insulin. You feel full, satisfied. You don't get cravings. Your cortisol levels begin to come down because the day is coming to an end. And normally you go to bed, by about 9:30, 10 o'clock. Okay, so this sounds like a Kudva typical day most of the time, especially in our household when it's just the two of us. This is bizarrely what our typical day is like, both in terms of meals as well as timings. But now let's look at what a not so healthy day may look like. Okay, a bad hormonal day is your alarm goes off at 7, you snooze it at 7:10, at 7:18, at 7:20, at which time you force yourself to make yourself a strong cup of coffee, strong cup of tea, but your cortisol levels are quite low, yeah, in the morning. So they are not rising with the sun. So you need a lot of caffeine in your system to actually raise your cortisol levels, okay? And then you're on the bit of a run because you're running late to work, you slept in or overslept. So you grab breakfast. When you grab breakfast, what do you grab? A banana, some juice, or even in our Indian households, you will have mainly carb-based breakfast, whether it is idli sambar or dosa or thepla or any of these, right? You'll have a cup of tea with sugar and milk and all of that. So you've got plenty of carb consumption going on in the first meal of the day. What is this? What has this done? It has flooded your bloodstream with a lot of glucose. Body can't handle so much glucose in the bloodstream because it's giving you this big spike of energy. You can start your day. But then what happens? A lot of insulin has to get released in order to store this glucose away from the blood and bring it back to normal levels. So a lot of insulin gets produced. So a lot of the blood glucose gets removed from the blood. Then what happens? The blood sugar suddenly dips within an hour or two. Within an hour or two, when it dips, you start getting in a bit of a headache, slightly this thing, and you feel a craving for something sweet, which is the blood sugar crash. Yeah. And again, then glucagon gets your blood sugar back to normal. It breaks down your reserved fats, etc. But your brain understands this as, okay, I need food, I need energy. And usually when you are feeling like that, what is the only energy that you can actually relate to is the energy of sugar. So you feel you'll have another cup of coffee, or in India, we'll have another chai because the chai has sugar in it, and the same process repeats itself. That there's a big spike, insulin does its job, then there's a big crash, glucagon does its job, and then brain gets foggy. This repeats itself many times during the day, which actually relates to, you know, that eating every 2 hours thing that became really popular a while ago, and eating low fat, carbohydrate rich snacks, okay, where you've just had a piece of fruit, or trying to eat healthy, I'm saying, or had a what do you call it, a granola bar, or you've had, lassi, or any of these quick snacks, which are all carb based. This continues all through the day, and eventually you try to do a good dinner, you try to have a big meal after dinner, but within an hour after dinner, you're hungry again. And this is a sign that you are actually leptin resistant. So the message of leptin telling the brain that there's satiety, not getting through, okay? You find yourself craving something sweet, and then you will sit in front of the telly and you will watch something and you will snack on something sweet. Or if sleep habits are poor, you're sleeping late, cortisol levels don't go down, and then this cycle repeats itself, because then in the morning you're struggling to wake up again, okay? So a large part, because of the kind of foods that we are consuming, this is leading to this hormonal disruption. Now, if it's happening a little bit once in a while, it's okay, right? But if it keeps happening for many years, let's say that you are a young adult, you've just started working, or your work is high pressure, you tell yourself, I have no time to exercise, you are vegetarian, you don't do any cooking of your own, you are dependent on someone else for your food all the time. So you feel quite helpless, saying that, oh, I only get this kind of food in my work canteen or in my office canteen, or, eggs are not allowed at home, so I cannot, I have to eat a carb meal at night, etc. So all of these reasons add up over the years. And when it adds up over the years, you suddenly realize that, oh my God, I'm so much heavier than I was just 3 years ago. And by that time, you are completely dependent on both the psychological and the hormonal effect of the foods that you have gotten used to eating. So you feel that, oh my God, this is normal How can you not? How can you ask me to stop eating X, Y, or Z? You know, because they have become, you become so dependent on them. And that's where you get this syndrome of always telling yourself, oh, but I eat so healthy. Oh my God, I just need to exercise a little bit more and, you know, I'll be able to burn more calories. You get into this whole calorie in, calorie out, you know, ratio and equation with yourself, you know, and you try to out exercise your food choices, but you have become so chronically dependent on your food choices that you don't pause to check, okay, do I need to eat differently? Meaning, do I need to make different food choices? So this is time to take a breather from this session and to think about, if you are now able to answer some of these questions. Why do I crave sweets late at night? Because you are leptin resistant. The message is not going to the brain saying that you have enough fat. Brain feels you're skinny. It needs more energy. Why can't I lose weight even when I eat less? Because of the kind of food that you're eating, not the quantity, but the over carb consumption of foods with no breaks. That is why. Why do I get that 3 o'clock slump every afternoon? Because you have been eating maybe too frequent high carb meals, which is leading to a blood spike and a blood sugar drop. And the blood sugar drop is what gives you the slump, brain fogginess, headache. Why do I wake up at 2 or 3 a.m. every single night? Because your cortisol levels are not regulated with the circadian rhythms. So maybe cortisol levels stay very high at sleep time, and then they are high. That's why you wake up. Why do I get so cranky if I don't eat every 2 hours? Because the body's become dependent on sugar as its primary source of fuel. So when the sugar levels dip, the body thinks, I don't have any energy, I need more. So that translates into, I need sugar. When did this spare tire come from? I eat so healthy. This came from a lot of accumulation of visceral fat that has happened over the years, not in a month, but over the years. So now you know why. Okay. And the main thing that we need to do is to change the food that we put on our plate, not the quantity, but the actual food with a good understanding of what that involves. Okay. Thank you for listening. Sorry, this session was longer than I thought it would be. It is, you know, it is quite complicated to understand hormonal response in the body. But I do think that, I don't know if I did a good job of explaining it over here, but the book, this chapter does a really good job of explaining it if you're patient enough to go through it step by step and maybe a few times. And then it will make a lot more sense and to relate it to your own food habits. Okay, thank you. I'm going to stop the recording now.